welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show. So, what we have here is a foreign policy that is malicious, brutal, that is genocidal, and that needs a pretty face. In this week's Crime Scenes edition of Arts Express, Pacifica host Garland Nixon in a continued breakdown of rainbow imperialism in Hollywood.
Garland Nixon here, and you know how it goes now in Hollywood. There's this whole big supposed diversity thing going on, the rainbow stuff where people are all different colors and races and all this kind of stuff. Got some issues with that. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I like to touch all of the subjects, whatever comes to mind. So this is something that came to mind, and it's the whole kind of supposed diversity thing in Hollywood, right? Hollywood's job was to clean the black folks out of America on the screen. And literally, there was a talk about sexism. There was literally a TV show called Father Knows Best. Okay, so that was America, right? America was set in this white picket fence. There was a white guy with 2.5 kids, and he sat at night and smoked a pipe, and he thought things through, and he made good decisions. And the mother came out, and she had a little skirt, or the stuff on like a maid, and she served him his dinner, and he watched TV, and then he made decisions for the whole family, and they all stood behind him, right? It was the picturesque way that America wanted to present the infamous nuclear family, right? Okay, that was Hollywood's job. That wasn't the case. That wasn't reality, but their job was to present that, and they did it. Okay. That's important to know because nothing's changed. This is not new. It's just a new version of Hollywood. So now, I tell you when I noticed it. When I noticed it, it became obvious, and that was the George Floyd protests. There was a marked turn in Hollywood. I'm watching the George Floyd protests, and I remember watching them on TV. And I thought to myself, a couple of things. I looked and I'm like, so as former law enforcement, retired, and a guy who was in charge of the investigations, and I had internal investigations and all that under me. I watched everything. I carefully researched the George Floyd. I received an award from the ACLU for my work on police nationally, for my work on police misconduct and police accountability and things like that. So I know the legal insides and outs of this stuff, right? I carefully researched the George Floyd thing. I looked at it and I said, yep, that if there ever was a case of police misconduct and police murder, this one is clear. This one is obvious, right? Okay. The issue is not what happened. It's never what happens in life. It's how you respond. So let's talk about the response, and let's go to Hollywood after that, right? We're getting back to Hollywood after that. So I watched this, a couple of things. Okay. Now, one of the things that happened was there was a demand for some kind of legislative action. Take some legislative action to deal with the George Floyd type issues, right? Well, let me tell you this. I knew the government wasn't going to do nothing. I knew good and damn well they weren't going to do a thing, right? I've been in this game long enough, and I worked on that stuff long enough. I knew they weren't going to do anything. They changed the conversation from a discussion of, hey, the cops killed a guy who was unarmed and who literally was saying to the police officer at the time, "You're killing me, man. You're killing me." But what does the government do for their constituents when their constituents want something and the government ain't going to do nothing? What do? They do something symbolic. So a bunch of Democrats, Pelosi and these people had a kente cloth on and put on a mask and kneeled. That's what they did. They kneeled, right? And that was it. That's all they ever did. They put on a kente cloth and they kneeled, and that was it. That's all that was ever going to happen, but symbolic things. Now let's go to Hollywood. Then, and I don't know if they said it to Hollywood or just, Hollywood's nature is to go in that direction. I wouldn't bet it was the former or the latter or some combination of both. and nobody really does anything. And that's always the plan, to give people a reason, the working class a reason to fight each other. And then the people, the ruling elite, don't really ever have to do anything about anything, as long as they can keep the working class fighting over stuff like that. So Hollywood then, it seems to me, started making a change. And it was maybe somewhat before that, don't get me wrong, but it became very, very pronounced. And I noticed that advertisements, let's be honest about this thing. Traditionally, Hollywood is about, and what they put on the screen was about pretty people, right? Gorgeous women, handsome men, those kinds of things, wherein people wanted to watch a movie. A guy's watching a movie, he wants to look at a hot babe. A woman's watching a movie, she wants to see Brad Pitt or Idris Elba or one of these other heartthrobs, right? The fact of the matter is, how many people, when I was a kid and I think back to a movie, they're like, hey, think about a good movie. I'm like, Weird Science, Kelly LeBrock. You know what I mean? When you're a teenage boy, you got hormones, you're thinking of Kelly LeBrock and Weird Science. You know what I mean? You're thinking of this. When you talk about movies, what was the woman's name? I could go on and on and on. You think of movies with a beautiful woman, or if you're a woman with this Brad Pitt or some guy, George Clooney, whoever. These people may be blithering assholes, but when somebody watches them in a movie, they like the looks of this person, right? And they remember the movie, and that helps sell the movie. It makes sense from an economic perspective. If I'm running a movie theater, if I'm running a movie company in Hollywood, they're going to be like, hey, what are you going to do? Put people that look like Garland, Nixon in the movie? I'm like, that old wrinkly bastard. No, we're going to go with Idris Elba for this one, right? Okay, right? That's the bottom. You're trying to sell. They used to try to actually sell movies, and they would put good-looking people in the movies, right? And that, it kind of helped sell a movie. Even movies that sucked. There's people who watch movies. There was a movie called Species, right? And it had, what was it, Natasha Henstridge, whatever her name is in it, right? And the movie pretty much sucked. But people didn't watch it for the species of that. They watched it to see old Natasha wandering around looking like a hot babe. Reality. That nobody would have watched that movie if they'd put, like, I don't know, somebody that didn't look. If Whoopi Goldberg was the species, I don't think would have did so great. Whoopi Goldberg did really good way back in some comedy movies because she was a talented comedian. As long as she wasn't doing politics, she was a very talented actress and comedian. So she had some good movies. But my point is that there's a place in the movies for talent. There's a place in the movie for hot guys and hot girls. And that went out the window. And what we started seeing, I started noticing, I'm watching advertisements, and I'm in America, right? And I'm watching advertisement after, and I would jokingly say this, man, ain't no white people in advertisement. It was like Richard Pryor telling his joke, right? Yes, I saw that movie about the future. There's no black folks in it. Looks like they ain't planning for us to be here, right? I looked at these advertisements and I'm like, ain't no white folks. Looks like they have crossed white people out of society. They no longer exist, right? And it's like movie after movie, show after show. And I got to say this, I don't care if people like it or not. You know me, I say what I think. They've gotten away from attractive people because it'll be like the least attractive person they can find that they put in there. I'm not saying that there haven't been great comedians that were overweight, Jackie Gleason, on, and I could go on and on and on, but I'm just saying, does that have to be all we get? We're fed is unattractive people. Not even saying that a person being overweight is unattractive. I'm saying literally the way I look ain't going to get it done. I'm not in a position to be maybe when I was in my 30s and I was a young cop, I'm lifting weights and I was buff and all that stuff. But those days are behind me, dude. I got a little too much here. My behind's flat now. I'm got a bad back. I'm wandering around. A heartthrob I ate. And I don't expect someone to come along and say, Garland, we're going to do a diversity movie and you're going to be the superhero star. And I'm like, yeah, really? Think so? The first guy I swing at, my back's going to go out on me and you're going to be carting me out, right? You're going to be flying me out to shock trauma, for God's sake. No, I'm not going to try to fake that out. That ain't who I am. And I'm not trying to fool anybody at this point in life, right? So what we have now is, and let me get to my problem with it. A Hollywood that tries to virtue signal and demonstrate, what they're trying to demonstrate is that our society is fair and our society gives everybody a shot. And our society is good and virtuous because there's no racism or sexism or this or whatever racism or sex or it's kind of weird like this. There's no racism or sexism or anything like that. And so, see, you can see that because we got people of all rainbow stuff, all ages and sexes and races and sizes and colors and genders and all that stuff in our advertisements and in our movies. So you can see that there's no racism and sexism. And racism and sexism is everywhere. Therefore, we have to fix it by having people of all races and genders and sexes and into the movie, right? There's that contradiction that it's nowhere. And so we got to demonstrate with through Hollywood that there is none here. And at the same time, it's everywhere. And we have to counteract it by having the whatever here, by having all these groups of people here.
And now on Arts Express, June 12th this month marks the assassination date of civil rights leader Medgar Evers 61 years ago in front of his Mississippi home. And journalist, political commentator, and MSNBC host Joy Reid has just come out with a biography and conversations with the wife of Medgar Evers, exploring their marriage united in a bond of activism and life in Medgar and Myrlie, Medgar Evers, and the love story that awakened America. Reid, who has herself fought against attacks for her defense of the Palestinian struggle, is our guest on the show. First, she reads an excerpt from her book, out from Mariner Press, then Joy Reid.
In this fragile and fractured nation, despite all of that, Medgar Evers had a deep and unfaltering love for Mississippi. He loved its pastoral plains, deep rivers, and wooded areas where he could fish and hunt and feed his family with his physical labor. His love for the black farmers and maids and butlers and strivers of this tormented state gave his life meaning. Myrlie Evers demanded more than once that Medgar tell her if he loved her and his children more than his work. He pressed her to understand that he did his work because he loved her and their children. He didn't want them to live as he did, growing up walking by the bloody clothes of a lynched black man on his way to school and seeing black men and women abused and disrespected as a daily fact of life. He was determined to exorcise the ghosts in the trees that whispered to him and his brother that in Mississippi and throughout America, people like them were something less than human. Medgar's work was a labor of love. James Baldwin, the eminent Black American author, met Medgar Evers shortly after New Year's Day in 1963, as Baldwin embarked on a lecture tour throughout the American South for the Congress on Racial Equality, in response to the violent riots that accompanied James Meredith's integration of the University of Mississippi months before. Meredith's bid to enter Ole Miss had been backed by Medgar, who had himself been rejected by the state's premier college simply because he was black. Baldwin quickly became close to Medgar, and decades later recalled him as a great man, a beautiful man, and a troublemaker in the way that Baldwin respected, and that he possessed the calm of someone who knows they're going to die before their time, like Martin Luther King. Baldwin returned to the United States from self-exile in Paris in 1957 and dove into civil rights. He befriended each of the three men he declared to be the core triumvirate of the movement, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and Medgar. All three were troublemakers in the eyes of the racist white Southern establishment and the federal government, particularly the FBI, which also kept a file on Baldwin. Medgar would be the first to meet the fate that the eminent author had perceived as all but inevitable. In the early morning hours of June 12, 1963, Medgar Evers was shot in the carport of his home in Jackson, Mississippi, by an assassin with links to Mississippi's White Citizens Council and the Ku Klux Klan. Medgar was just 37 years old. Myrlie, who was only 30, became the widowed single mother of 3 young children and the frightened and despondent but determined author of her martyred husband's legacy. Love had made Myrlie put up with the fear and dread that came with being the wife of a civil rights leader who was continually on the hit list of the Mississippi KKK and hated by every racist in the state, Kluxer or not. Love made her put up with the threatening phone calls and the terror her children endured as they learned to drop to the floor if they heard gunshots and to hide in the bathtub if the bad men came for their daddy. And Love would make Myrlie pick herself up off the bloody pavement where Medgar lay dying and turn her screams and rage into a determination to hunt the killer for decades until she got justice for her slain husband and her family.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, Prairie. Hi, Prairie. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello and welcome to our show.
Thank you. Okay.
What inspired you to embark on writing this book, and what do you bring to the table with Medgar and Myrlie that's new and different?
Well, what inspired me to write the book was Myrlie Evers Williams herself. She's a brilliant and wonderful human being, and just sitting and talking with her and having her tell me the love story of Medgar Evers and how she met him and how much she still is deeply in love with this man really inspired me to want to write about it. And I had not read a civil rights love story, and she told me one, and I said, that's the story that I wanted to tell. And what, I tried to do with, my wonderful research team was to tell a story of civil rights where we normally just hear about the great men who were engaged in it, but to tell a fuller story of the lives that they lived, which included their wives, their children, their friends, their neighbors, the people that lived on their block, because that's all that was involved in these movements. It wasn't just one man out there giving one speech. It was a whole life that was lived, and usually a very ordinary life that became extraordinary because of the missions that they had.
Now, most relationships and marriages may be based on shared feelings, but what can you say about the unique, extraordinary power, intent, and intensity of a bond like this between a couple when they share as well a dedication, convictions, and involvement in political struggle?
Well, this was a difficult marriage in a lot of ways because they didn't always share the same mission. When Myrlie marries Medgar, when Myrlie Evers marries Medgar, she really wants to be a 1950s housewife. She really initially didn't sign up to be a movement wife. That wasn't her plan. And Medgar's first job that he got was selling insurance, and she thought, well, that will be a decent life. But what she soon found out, he was also selling liberation with insurance, which she knew was dangerous. And so she feared for his life every day that they were married to one another. She feared every time he left the house that he wouldn't come home because she knew that they were number one on the hit list of the Klan, and that put not just him, but them and their children in constant danger. So there was a lot of tension. There were a lot of debates over whether or not this was the way that she wanted to live. And so, she was very, very open about talking about the struggle to come to terms with what she knew would be a very short life for Medgar. And when the worst and their worst fears actually happened, it placed her in a position of having to step forward and, be the champion of his legacy in the world. So, they had an 11-year tumultuous relationship, but in the end, she became the lifelong translator of his legacy. So it wasn't easy, but she managed to do it and do it very well.
And speaking of political struggle, and of course you once taught race, gender, and media, what can you say about the struggle you faced personally and professionally and prevailing on the one hand as a woman and on the other hand as an African American?
Well, I never grew up in seeing too many templates for what I do. Obviously, the great Gwen Ifill was one. But this is this world of media that has been very white male dominated. In the era that I write about in Medgar and Myrlie, all of the journalists were white men. There were no white women. And by the time, Barbara Walters came along, in the 1960s and early 1970s, she couldn't even legally open a bank account by herself, nor could Myrlie Evers when her husband died, because women couldn't open a bank account typically until into the late 1970s. Women at this time had no rights at all in terms of control of our bodies, no rights to birth control or abortion. So you're really talking about an era in which women were second-class citizens. And so for me, I grew up, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. We've seen a lot of progress, but we've also seen a lot of barriers. And just getting into media and doing what I do, I am kind of out there on my own. There aren't too many black women doing this. There are a few, but still not nearly enough. So it's constantly a struggle, and it's an issue where we're now trying to be those who are providing representation so that more young black women can do what I do.
And what do you feel these critical events you write about of the past with your book, what do you feel they speak to the present and shed light on the present?
Well, I think for one thing, it's a real demonstration that the cliche that, people died for your right to vote is not a cliche. Literally, Medgar Evers was assassinated because he was attempting to give black Mississippians the right to vote and access to their legal rights under the 15th Amendment. I think that's important to remember, and also that this is such recent history. He dies in 1962, and that's 2 years before Malcolm X is then assassinated, 5 years before Dr. King. But Dr. King's assassination is only 12 years before Ronald Reagan goes to Neshoba County, Mississippi, and proclaims states' rights, and eviscerates all that Lyndon Johnson passed, much of which had been urged by Medgar Evers in terms of the Civil Rights Act and ultimately the Voting Rights Act. So we had a very brief period of what you might call modern-day Reconstruction that's been followed by a long period of redemption, and then another moment of Reconstruction when Barack Obama is elected, followed by the moment of redemption that we're in now, where we're seeing a violent attempt to snatch back even the progress that we've gotten over just my lifetime. And you're seeing just a violent sort of attempt to repress the progress that we've had and suppress the progress, not just that African Americans have made in this country, but that women have made. And, I think what we all have to learn from history is that it will often be repeated if we forget and let go of the, hanging on to the goals and to the gains that we've made. They can easily be taken back because there's always somebody who wants to take them back.
And as a child of an African father, how do you feel that has given you a broader and deeper insight into what's going on around the world and here as well now?
Well, my father was African. My mother was from the Caribbean. She was from Guyana. And I think, immigrants to this country do have a different perspective on the United States. In some ways, they have a more rose-colored glass look at the country. But that's usually they're quickly disabused of that when they actually get here. And my mother was when she came and, was sort of surprised by the kind of intensity of racism, even in New York where she lived. And I think that, it's sobering. I think when you come to a country that you hear from outside is this beacon of democracy, only to find out that it's democracy for some and not for all. But my mother was committed to the project. She became an American citizen in time to vote for Jimmy Carter for president in 1976. And, I think that she, if she was alive today, would, be not surprised by the fact that we keep going backwards toward a kind of racist construct and a construct that opposes women's liberation. But I think that perspective also allows you to understand that there's nothing, guaranteed about America's democracy. This is a very young country, and the countries that my mother and father came from struggled with democracy, particularly the Congo, which still struggles with it. So I know just from that perspective that we can easily lose what we have if people don't fight for it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Joy Reid, for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Goodbye.
Bye.
And coming up now on the show...
Hi, this is Jack Shalom, and I want to introduce you to a new periodical that I think you will find enlightening and informative, and it's called The New York War Crimes. That's right, The New York War Crimes, not The New York Times, because what's contained therein you will not find in the so-called paper of record. No, the New York War Crimes is put out by the Writers Against the War on Gaza and is dedicated, among other things, to exposing how the media manufactures consent for genocide, particularly how the New York Times manufactures that consent. And it's a real lesson in how disinformation and propaganda really works in these United States. You can find copies of the paper for free at NewYorkWarCrimes.com and find out more about the work of Writers Against the War on Gaza, who put out the New York War Crimes, at WritersAgainstTheWarOnGaza.com. Now, in addition to dissecting the lies of the New York Times, the New York War Crimes publishes writings by Palestinians that would never see the light of day in mainstream media. And one feature that I thought was particularly trenchant was a series called Dispatches from Gaza that had been gathered from eyewitness accounts of what has been taking place in Gaza since this October 7th. So here now I'll be reading from the New York War Crimes, Dispatches from Gaza. These dispatches from Gaza are drawn from writings collected and translated by the Passages Through Genocide Project. And the following is by Noor al-Din Hajjaj. Noor al-Din Hajjaj is a writer from Gaza. His novel Wings That Do Not Fly was published in 2021, and his first play, The Grey Ones, was performed on stage in 2022. He was killed in an Israeli massacre on the 2nd of December 2023. And now the diary. October 16th, 2023, Diaries of Displacement in Southern Gaza. On the other side of death, destruction, and fear. I fell asleep at 4 and wake up a minute later to find that it's past 6. I go to the bakery where there's a long human line standing waiting, and after 3.5 hours, more than the amount of sleep I've had, my turn arrives. I'm told I can't take more than 1 bundle of bread. I try to explain my situation, but he doesn't listen. I tell him we've been displaced. We're staying with a family here. Together there are 70 of us, including children, and 2 bundles of bread won't be enough. So he says I can go back and stand in line again if I want more. I take the bread, mutter a prayer, and leave. I arrive at the house after half an hour's walk, and they tell me they need water. I take the jerry can, walk to the water filtration station, and join a queue longer than the last one. 3 hours later, it's my turn. I go back to the house after a long day, and we tell the kids 1 glass of water will have to do. Don't waste it. I put my body down on the sofa to rest a little. Then they tell me it's nearly dinner time and they want bread and food from the supermarket. So I return for more queuing and more waiting and more non-existent basic humanity. In the evening, I promise them I'll go back to the house in the morning, but 10 minutes later, we redivide the available space so as to make the most of every inch where a child or adult might sleep, even the passages and the entryway, and cover the floor of the tiny flat with 30 bodies. We make sure the women and children have all got room, then distribute ourselves out, 2 sleeping on the couch and 2 staying awake in case something happens, God forbid, so they can quickly wake everyone else up. Not that that's necessary, because after 15 minutes to a half an hour of sleep, we will all wake up anyway to the sound of heavy bombing, and the children will cry until their mothers put them back to sleep, and so on, until day breaks and the cycle begins again. November 1st, 2023. Good evening, world. Internet and phone connections were cut off last night, and what I once considered impossible suddenly became reality, but under different conditions. The postman can't make his rounds amid the bombing and destruction. The newspaper he carries will bear the same headline each day. Gaza is being exterminated. Life sets each evening and does not rise again the next day. Maybe tomorrow's edition will contain the news of my death. This is what was on my mind the moment communications were disconnected and we found ourselves cut from the world, and the world cut off from us and what was happening to us. The bombing became more intense, and we placed our hands on our hearts because this was what we feared, and here it was, getting closer. We were going to die in silence without the world knowing anything, to the point we couldn't even record our last moments or shout out our last words. I live in a small neighborhood called Al-Shuja'iyya, which is on the eastern edge of Gaza City. Every night, the sound of the explosions is constant, explosions of different kinds coming from different directions, and with every explosion that rocks our house and our hearts, we hold on tight to one another, knowing that at some point there'll be an explosion we won't hear because it will have already blown us up. This is why I am writing now. It might be my last message that makes it out to the free world, flying with the doves of peace to tell them that we love life, or at least what life we have managed to live. In Gaza, all paths before us are blocked, and instead we're just one tweet or breaking news story away from death. Anyway, I'll begin. My name is Noor al-Din Hajjaj. I am a Palestinian writer. I am 27 years old, and I have many dreams. I am not a number, and I do not consent my death to being passing news. Say, too, that I love life, happiness, freedom, children's laughter, the sea, coffee, writing, Feiruz, everything that is joyful, though these things will all disappear in the space of a moment. One of my dreams is for my books and my writings to travel the world, for my pen to have wings that no unstamped passport or visa rejection can hold back. Another dream of mine is to have a small family, to have a little son who looks like me, and to tell him a bedtime story as I rock him in my arms. My greatest dream is that my country will have peace, that children will smile more brightly than the sun, that we will plant flowers in every place a bomb once fell, that we will trace out our freedom on every wall that has been destroyed, that war will finally leave us alone so we can for once live our lives. November 2nd, 2023. Today I went for a little walk around the city, or rather what remains of it. I saw how its colors have contracted into one single color. Where did this gray come from? This gray that has the power to impose itself upon all the colors we know, if not bearing tons of explosives. I walked across vast amounts of rubble, trying to tread carefully as if in a minefield, so as to avoid every spot where children had sketched out dreams upon memories. I wasn't afraid of touching frayed electrical cables in the street. They were just hangman's nooses, witnesses to all this destruction. I saw mountains of shrouds being carried on a truck to the last and only safe place on earth. There are no funeral processions in which martyrs are carried upon shoulders to their final resting place because their entire families, martyrs just like them, accompany them to the grave. Perhaps the last wish they made before the bombs fell was the same we all make. If we are to die, then let us die together. We don't want to give death the chance to leave one of us alone, grieving for the rest of his or her life over the life that the others should have lived. I passed by a school for displaced children, and my heart bled to see how humanity can be violated, how our basic needs can be stripped down such that we end up haggling over a gallon of water or a paracetamol. Other people are walking in all four directions, searching for a bundle of bread or somewhere to charge the batteries of the torch they use at night. or water that's safe to drink, or other basic necessities that aren't available anymore. All this was just in the course of a short walk, no more than 30 minutes, which took me up and down a few nearby streets. Most of the houses hadn't survived the strikes that hit their roofs and had fallen to the ground, collapsing on top of their inhabitants. God, the scale of the catastrophe. Words and images cannot come close to conveying it. We can't bear all this anymore. We're so tired. Please, God, let this be over sooner and not later. And that was by the Palestinian writer Noor al-Din Hajjaj. He was killed in an Israeli massacre on the 2nd of December 2023. You are listening to a reading of the diary of Noor al-Din Hajjaj as collected and translated by the Passages Through Genocide Project. You can find that full archive online at gazapassages.com. And this particular memoir was republished in the periodical The New York War Crimes, available at newyorkwarcrimes.com. And the New York War Crimes is just one of the projects created by the organization Writers Against the War on Gaza, and more information about them can be found at writersagainstthewarongaza.com. These are all essential, important online resources to fight against the war on Gaza. This is Jack Shalom for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
And next up on Arts Express.
Good evening, and welcome to Arts Express. This is the UK desk, and I'm your host, Jack Clarke. Today we're diving deep into the heart of America with a genre that's as iconic as it is misunderstood: American country music. Now, as a Brit, I always thought country music was all about cowboys and conservative values. But I was in for a surprise. It wasn't until I came across the work of Glenda and Jesse Drew that I realized country music has roots that run far deeper and stories that resonate with the struggles of the working people on both sides of the pond. Their film, Open Country, explores the true origins of country music, revealing it as a powerful expression of working-class struggles and aspirations. It's a story of seeking freedom from government interference and striving for a dignified life. Before we dive into our conversation with Glenda and Jesse, let's listen to a clip from Open Country.
It's like an old fella told me one time, once a miner, always a miner.
All of these songs were just being sung by people who didn't write them down much, but sang them with each other.
I wanted the kids back on the farm to be able to sing along with his songs. You know, that's kind of what we wanted to do. Our motto was that anyone can do it.
Music has a way of reaching folks in spite of the corporate limitations.
Kind of to start with, what I'm interested in is could you just individually kind of share a bit about your backgrounds and what has drew you into filmmaking?
Okay, I'm Glenda Drew. I have a background in photography. From photography, I got into filmmaking and joined a collective that Jesse was part of, Paper Tiger Television, that was working on using DIY aesthetics and techniques to tell kind of alternative stories about the media.
Yeah, and I've been working in media for a long time, not just film, but underground newspapers and radio, and I've worked in television, film, etc. So I'm really interested in communications. And I have been a member of this group called Paper Tiger Television for a very long time.
With both of you being professors at UC Davis, how does your academic background relate to country music and the research you undertook for Open Country?
The funny thing is that, country music is not exactly an academic subject. So, I have to say that this is something we've been working on kind of under the table for a very long period of time. Country music, and you could pretty much say, is not much respected in academia. And so this was kind of a side project, but it definitely did drive us heavily into research as we started to sort of uncover what we see as the real history of country music.
What motivated you to explore the roots of American country music in Open Country?
So my past is a little bizarre for professor. I was a teenage runaway at 15, and I lived rurally. I did a lot of farm work, and then I worked in factories for many years. And even as a young person at 15, I started to connect with country music. I kind of like working in a field all day. You just can't connect really with Led Zeppelin anymore. And someone turned me on to Merle Haggard, and I was thinking, yeah, this guy really speaks more directly to what I'm doing. And so I spent a lot of years doing that kind of industrial work, warehouses, factories, and really country music is really one of the only music genres that address what people spend most of their day doing, which is working.
Glenda, what motivated you personally to explore the roots of country music?
Well, I grew up in a very working class town on the border of Chicago, and my father was a truck driver. And so we listened to country music in our house. I also worked in a factory in high school, and I actually didn't really give country music that much thought. But then when Jesse and I met and we would be going to bars in San Francisco, we'd be hanging out with each other, we would always play these country songs on jukeboxes in cool neighborhoods. And it just was a way that we connected and started talking about the importance of this music and started to develop in conversations.
The British perception of country music often revolves around cowboys and farmland, with many unaware of its origins and viewing it as very conservative. How do you reconcile with the genre's associations with conservatism and traditional values?
Well, I think that's one of the things we trace out in the film, is that originally it was not connected to that kind of ideology at all. It certainly has been, moved in that direction in recent decades, mostly through the influence of Nashville and the sort of corporate culture of country radio, who owns country radio, and they're really in a position to help people define what country music is. So we wanted to sort of roll it back and look at the past. I mean, the whole thing about cowboys is interesting, as well. I mean, the whole notion of cowboy we think of as these stoic, big white dudes with white hats on horses, and it's like cowboys were working class stiffs. That was a bad job to have. A lot of cowboys were black also. It was a working class job, and so it is true. A lot of music comes from those cowboys who were really singing about, exploitation and hard times in their work lives. It wasn't nothing heroic about it. I mean, and so that is one of the examples we kind of like to point out.
In the documentary, you discuss how radio stations have banned and controlled country music due to conservative biases. How significant is the impact of that kind of censorship on the genre?
It doesn't have to be outright banning. Which sometimes it is. I mean, the Dixie Chicks is a famous example of that. But, the people who put those playlists together are very carefully trained, as we kind of go over it in the film. These huge radio stations, corporations, that own all the country radio stations. And they also own the urban stations too, which is kind of odd. So they're not only defining what country music is, they're also defining what hip hop is. And so I think that corporate culture, as we point out, is a really significant factor. And in terms of radio, I think radio plays a large role. And one of the things we do with this film is we let groups use the film as a fundraiser. And a lot of times we offer the film to low power FM and FM community radio stations. And really, that's where country music is still alive. You have people who genuinely care about the music. You can hear some real country radio on public radio stations, community radio stations, but you're just not going to hear it on Nashville stations.
I noticed that the screenings of Open Country seem more like events than typical film screenings, with even live music performances included. How important is that in reconnecting with country music nationwide?
We have a lot of interviews with local people in the film. Like, they're the storytellers of, they're holding the history of this music. We all are. And so instead of going to big stars, although we have a few well-known people in the film, it's really a story being told by local people who own that information, and own that story. And that's also how it's being rolled out. It's local musicians who come and sing a few songs. It really connects the audience in beautiful ways. Sometimes even people start singing during the film, which has been very beautiful. We just had a show in Mars Hill, North Carolina, which is close to Asheville. And there were many audience members who were part of an old-time music lesson group. And as songs came on that they knew, it was almost otherworldly in the room where all these people started to sing, and they had some training in singing. So suddenly it was all these people around us singing these songs. It was really beautiful.
Because of the way you have presented Open Country, using more archival footage and historical facts over strong directorial opinions, have you received any backlash or resistance during development? Has there been people, for example, who feel they have ownership over how country music is presented and haven't liked your approach in the film?
That's a very good question, because, a lot of times when you're creating something or editing something, you're writing something, I don't know about you, but a lot of times I have like an imaginary person over my shoulder that I'm kind of addressing. And, a lot of the editing, that was the kind of person that was looking over. And so I think the film is crafted in a way that really brings people onto our side. And a lot of people point out that, oh, there's really very little narration in it. So we're really not pushing a point of view. We are showing these are real authentic musicians, and this is where they're coming from, and these are their lyrics. So I think it neutralizes and wins people over, which is really the goal.
Yeah, well, actually, on that point, because you've got artists like kind of Orville Peck, Maya Bryn, Charlie Crockett, and Little Nas X, who have sort of introduced new dimensions to country music, particularly in the youth. They've done a lot of cross-genre innovations and more what people are saying modern innovations of country music. How does this fit into the kind of broader narrative you present in Open Country? And do you think it's a positive thing for country music going forward?
We're not critics of contemporary country music, but I think what we're doing is providing a foundation for a lot of those people who can walk into the country music scene and feel comfortable. Like, yeah, I have a place here. Like the whole controversy, about, whether you can be a Black performer of country music is just absurd. As we show in the film, much of the background, the foundations of country music is from Black performers, Black musicians. And so they don't have to necessarily even feel like they're like breaking into like a new music genre. It's already there. So they're reconnecting to those roots, to that past. And so I think we hope that this film sort of encourages, younger musicians to like stake a claim and, take back country music, which has really been our goal.
The British Isles played a crucial role in the early development of country music, with influences from English ballads, Scots, Irish fiddle music, and more. How does Open Country address these transatlantic influences, and what impact do you think they have had on the genre's evolution?
Well, I think one of the points we drive home is that country music is actually a very cosmopolitan form of music, because as you point out, it does come from all over the world. A lot of people think country music kind of sprung naturally from the hollers of West Virginia. It's very worldwide. Like you mentioned, people from Scotland, from Ireland, from the British Isles. They came into brought their musical traditions, meshed with a lot of music of formerly enslaved peoples in the South, and creates new forms that then spread back to England, Ireland, Scotland. So, and it's not just within Europe, as we try to point out, like the origins of the lap steel guitar, which is a very classic sound of Nashville. As you point out, that comes from Hawaii. It comes from Hawaiian musicians, and a lot of people are stunned to see that. A lot of people are still surprised that the banjo is African. That always, we've had country music people who come to the film and go, I can't believe it. Like the banjo is so American, but it's not, so, it really is a mixture of, world cultures, or yodeling, the tradition of yodeling. There's a lot of yodeling, in early country music. And, people think of yodeling as being Swiss. Well, it is Swiss. That actually where it came from, because they were Swiss musicians who were popular on the musical routes through the South in the 20s and 30s, and they were a popular kind of sideshow, and people were like, yeah, that yodeling, that's great. I'm gonna do that. And that's kind of how it's a hybrid musical form.
Guys, this has been absolutely phenomenal. What I really want to know for our listeners in New York is, I believe you have an upcoming screening actually in Brooklyn on the 30th of June. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what our listeners can expect on that event?
Well, we have a musician that's going to open up named Lizzie No, and the screening is at the Jalopy Theater and School of Music at 315 Columbia Street in Brooklyn, and the doors open at 6 o'clock. Music starts at 6:30. The film starts at 7 o'clock, and it's a benefit for the Jalopy Theater. In fact, one of the things we would point out is that all of these shows we don't keep any of the money. We cooperate with a local group, and basically they can keep any of the income. So it's also a way of supporting community organizations to do the work that they do, because we have jobs, so we don't need the money.
And just kind of one final one, what are you hoping audiences will take away from Open Country when they see it?
Joy, a greater understanding, and kind of a lighter feeling about the state of country music, the possibilities in their own lives with creativity.
Jesse, Glenda, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Keep an eye out for Open Country coming to theatres or event spaces near you. I've been Jack Clarke, the UK desk for Arts Express, signing off.
And more information about their national tour is at opencountryfilm.com. And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, Expression in the Arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.